there are two major things involved in making disciples. Evangelism, of course. That's why we exist in the world and relate to the world and live in the world, not being a part of it, but we live there to be a witness. And then why does the church exist as a gathered community? Well, to edify, to teach one another, to help each other grow. That is why we get together on Sunday mornings and at other times as well. So, today we come to the next verse in Ephesians chapter 4. We've been seeing in edification that God has given people to the church and really involves everyone because we're equipping one another to minister for the building up of the entire body. That's what we've been seeing the last couple Sundays. And today we're to verse 15 where it says, "But speaking the truth in love." Let's back up and get the context. Reread that again. It says in verse 11, "For he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love." You notice that that's all one long sentence? Aren't you glad you don't have to read it without taking a breath? One big, long, complex sentence, and that is interesting to what we're going to talk today. This entire context of building up one another. We want to see today that in order to build one another up, we must learn to speak the truth in love. To speak the truth in love. Now, right away, we want to understand that speaking the truth in love requires the delicate balance that Jesus modeled for us. Jesus was the best model possible of being both love, grace, and speaking the truth. And you and I don't always find it that easy to speak the truth in love. First of all, we don't find it very easy in our culture to speak the truth. We live in a culture where spin, we understand that that is making the facts reflect better on me than otherwise they might. That's how we spin things to make ourselves look better. No, not only the politicians do that. I'm afraid that's rubbing off on the entire culture. So we're all tempted to exaggerate sometimes or spin and give certain justifications for why things are the way they are or whatever, not to give the whole total truth without somehow coloring it, might be another term we could use, to make us look better. And that is our culture. And I'm afraid that affects us as well. And so we need to be aware of that. Our culture teaches us. I read an article on the news, and actually this was Fox News, which a little more conservative. And here's an article that's telling us that telling white lies has a benefit of helping relationships flow more smoothly. Well, that's not biblical. But that's kind of what our culture is buying into. You don't always tell the truth because it's uncomfortable sometimes to tell the truth. And so a white lie here and there can kind of keep things going smoothly instead of causing a little bump in the road in your relationship with someone else. But that's not biblical. The Bible tells us to speak the truth. In fact, speaking the truth has now fallen out of favor in our culture. It's no longer regarded or expected. It's no longer expected. We don't really expect our politicians to tell us the truth anymore. We certainly don't demand it of them. We certainly don't chide them or have, we ought to have consequences if they don't. We can vote in those who do speak the truth and so on. But really, as a culture, we don't expect them to speak the truth, and we don't demand it either. We don't really appreciate it when some people do tell the truth. I don't know if you've had the experience where you've been in a group of people, maybe at work, if you work at an office or whatever, and you're kind of the one to kind of hold out and say, well, now, really, that doesn't match our ethics. Well, you get glares, don't you, sometimes, of, why do you want to hold up our plan here that would work so well if we can just convince these people of this, even though it might not be totally accurate? Ethics can get in the way. And so we live in a culture where telling the whole truth is not really regarded as important and sometimes even not welcomed. And yet our culture tries to deny that truth even exists. We know we live in a postmodern culture where there's debate whether there is anything as absolute truth. God's word says it is absolute truth. God is truth. But our culture says, no, not really. There might be truth for you, but it might not be truth for me, and so on. So don't talk to me about truth. But the Bible tells us that, yes, truth, God is truth, and God wants us to be truthful like Him. That is one of those communicable attributes. God has attributes that are not communicable. He's all-powerful and all-knowing and sovereign and those things that I will never be. But then there are certain things like truth and love and justice and so on that He wants me to be. And so He wants me to be truthful like He does. Now, we see in the Bible even an instance when Jesus is on trial, back in John 18, verse 37 and 38, when Pilate says to him, Jesus, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate, back in 33 AD, says, "What is truth?" And so this is not a new problem, is it? This is an age-old human problem with what is truth and how do we relate to it and what do we base on it. Now this verse says, be truthful in love, as we've read it. Or really we could say literally, the Greek says, truthing in love, making it a verb. Speaking, living the truth in love. Truth means to speak statements consistent with fact or reality. That's what truth is. To say, this is consistent. What I'm saying, what I'm living, what I'm communicating is exactly accurate with reality as it is. It's consistent with what the facts really are. Now, you and I as believers, we should have the kind of character that causes others to always expect the truth from us. I read a little saying this week. Don't lie to a person who always tells the truth, and don't trust a person who always lies. There's a character we come to expect. God's word says that believers ought not to have to really swear to establish that now I'm telling the truth. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? We have our politicians and certain leaders. We say, well, now, not only did he not tell the truth, but he did it under oath. I mean, we got to put this person under oath to try to find the truth out of him. Well, his character, no one expects the truth. God says, don't be that way as believers. We should not have to even take an oath. We should, Jesus said, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Let's let people know that we always tell the truth. They don't have to put us under the oath to try to get the truth out of us. That's a character we ought to have. We ought to be truthful. Why? Because God is truthful, and He demands truth, and He demands that you and I be truthful. So I hope we understand this morning what it is to be truthful, even though our culture does not understand that, or at least doesn't want to follow it. Now, secondly, we need to speak the truth in love, but it doesn't come naturally to us. It's not our default setting as we talk in computer language. It is not what just happens. We don't just naturally always want to be truthful. We live in a culture which is becoming increasingly more unloving. Have you noticed that? I mean, we have more, sectarian differences and accusations, and the words are stronger as people who are different than us, and we accuse each other, and more tension. All of that is just building. It is not a loving atmosphere. Even the push to be politically correct, okay? We want to be politically correct and not say anything that hurts the other person. That is not improving the situation. I hope you realize. They think it will, but it doesn't. And our culture is equated to not becoming more loving in any way. The interesting thing is the word for love here in this verse is not phileo, speaking the truth with friendly, brotherly love, not eros, with the physical, sensual love. This is the word agape, with the kind of unconditional, sacrificial love that God has for us. And so, the Bible is telling us in this passage, as believers to believers, especially, also to lost people out there we relate to, you and I need to be in the habit, we need to have the character of constantly speaking the truth, yes, but in agape, sacrificial, unconditional love for that person. That's what the Bible command is. However, you and I are tempted to operate in one extreme or the other. Now, picture with me if we had a giant pendulum up here, like is in the bottom of the old clocks, okay? And it swings from one side, from one wall to the other. And we could put over here on this wall, speaking the truth, everything exactly according to fact. And on the other wall, we could put with love. And you and I have this tendency to swing from one extreme to the other. And of course, that's Satan behind that. He doesn't want us to be balanced in the Christian life at all. He wants us to go off on some tangent and overdo some things. And by the way, we have strengths in our personality. And so some of us just naturally have an inclination to go to one of those two. And we consider that a strength. But I hope you realize that any of us can use our strength to an extreme and it becomes a weakness. Well, what do we mean by that? There are some people, of course, that pride themselves in telling the truth no matter what the person's reaction would be. And so often they need to speak the truth even though there's no love involved in it. One example from the Bible would be the Pharisees, right? There's some truth in lots of things that the Pharisees said. Now, they didn't understand Jesus Christ and the gospel, but as far as the law and obeying the law, there's some truth in some of the things they said. They could, accuse the woman caught in adultery that that's sin, that that's wrong, that she could have, according to the law, been stoned, and so on. There's some truth to that. But of course, they had no grace whatsoever. They had no love whatsoever. They were all about pride, self-righteousness, that they were the right ones and everybody ought to operate by their little rules and so on. Legalism. Our words can cut other people to their very core. And so we need to be careful with truth because we can go to the extreme of wounding other people. It is a tragedy that the world today sometimes observes that Christians are the only ones to shoot their wounded. And they look on and say, wow, rather than help that person who's struggling, who's fallen into sin, who needs help, the church really is judgmental and shoots them and wounds them greatly. Others will not grow. This is in the passage of growing, right? We're not going to build one another up. We're not going to grow as a body. We're not going to grow as individual believers unless there is love in how we relate and communicate to one another. If I'm on this extreme of just giving the truth without love, that's going to produce not growth, not becoming mature in Jesus Christ, which we've talked about, not building up the body. In this context, it's going to produce discouragement. It's going to produce defeat. It's going to produce withdrawal from that person. And, there are people who've left local churches because you can talk to them and say, and they'll tell you, well, I used to go to church. Okay, but you don't anymore. No, why? Well, because someone said this, someone did this. I'm no longer welcome there at all, or I don't feel loved there, I don't feel needed there because of something somebody said that hurt them deeply. And so we have to be careful on this extreme if we just speak the truth without love. Now, speaking the truth does not mean that we have to say everything we think, or we observe, or we know. There are some people that are committed to think everything they observe that's wrong in somebody, they believe they have the right or the role or the need to share it every time. Jesus didn't do that. You say, well, how do you know that? Jesus is the Holy Son of God. He came from heaven to this earth, and he knew how it all was in the beginning, how God created it and wanted it. Every single person he saw and talked to and related to, he could see right through them. He knew what they were thinking. He knew the woman at the well, how many husbands she'd had, or her past. She wasn't married to the guy she's living with now. I mean, he knew everything about everybody he looked at, but he didn't go around and give them all an encyclopedia of their sins, right? He communicated with people in love. He told them only what he needed to tell them to help them grow, to help them take the next step spiritually, or whatever. If Jesus, being the Son of God, knowing everything, and of course I think it was a big burden for him to live in this sinful world and see through people and see all the shame and the guilt and abuse and everything that he saw, if he did not find it necessary to name everything he saw wrong, and you and I dare not take it upon ourselves, that role, to say everything that we observe, everything we think, everything we know to be true, there are many times that saying it is not going to help. And so we refrain from pronouncing, even though what we say might be true. So it seems to me that our social media of today is teaching our culture and our world to write everything they think and feel, right? I mean, people get on, Facebook's just one of them, and they write exactly what they feel about everything of that day. I went to an online dictionary to look up the meaning of a word, of an English word, and it tells you what the word etymology is and what it means and so on. And at the end, would you please comment as to how you feel about this? What? Who cares how I feel about the dictionary definition of this word? I mean, it's not for me to pronounce them right or wrong, but that's the kind of social media culture we live in, right? We are training ourselves that my opinions on everything are so important that the whole world ought to be able to see them, and they ought to care somehow. No, I do not need to share everything I think and feel. It's not important. Jesus didn't say everything. I can't either. He said only what would serve to help them others grow. And he always said it in love. Now, of course, the adulterous woman, caught in adultery, brought before Jesus as a test, really. The Pharisees wanted to see if he would really stone her, because that's what they wanted done. Now, obviously, they caught her in adultery. How did they do that? Well, probably there was a setup. Probably, there's a man involved who they didn't bring, who got this woman involved in this. But they bring only her, and Jesus walks this fine line, does he not? And he's able to say, okay, if the law says stone her, then fine. But the first one of you who's without any sin, you pick up the first stone and you start it. And then he writes something in the dust in the ground. And of course the scripture writer doesn't tell us what it is. But whatever it is, made the point for these men. I don't know what he was writing there. If he was writing the man's name, who they should have brought as well, who was a co-conspirator, or if some Bible scholar says maybe he was writing their mistresses' names in the dust. I don't know. But they all knew that they were sinners. And so they walked away one by one, starting with the oldest. I've had the privilege of going to minister in other countries with some dear old men of God. retired Bible college teachers and whatever, and getting to know them really closely and say, hearing them say, Lonnie, the older I get, the more sensitive I become to sin, and the more I understand how deep a sinner we all really are. That's spiritual maturity, isn't it? That's growth. And these older Pharisees started walking away first, and all of them left. Jesus doesn't, say go on living in adultery. He says, no, go and sin no more. But he forgives her. He offers her grace and love along with the truth of recognizing her sin. Jesus, of course, did have some strong words for some Pharisees when they were false teachers, when they were leading people astray, when they called what he was doing by the power of Satan instead of God. But even when Nicodemus, the teacher of Israel, God calls him in John 3, when Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night, Jesus doesn't condemn him, doesn't have a heated argument with him, doesn't say, Nicodemus, you are leading everybody astray, and just let him have it. Jesus, in love, answers Nicodemus' question and points Nicodemus to himself, the only way to heaven, and helps Nicodemus understand that gospel message. If you and I cannot say the truth in a way that our listener will hear it in love, then we should keep it to ourselves. All right? We don't have to say everything. We should keep it to ourselves. There's a lot of things that if I cannot say in love, I need to just keep my mouth zipped. And it's not going to be helpful. It's going to be detrimental instead. So, if we think we must say it, there's some of you who say, well, that just burns within me. I want to explode when I see things that are wrong, and if I don't call it out as wrong. Well, I'm not saying that we okay it. That's very different. Jesus didn't okay a lot of things that he was in this sinful world seeing. But he didn't comment on every sin he was seeing. And if you and I have this inside that we just have to say this to this person, well, then I think we're saying it for our benefit, not theirs at all. You understand what I'm saying? It's not done in love. It's done for our own benefit. Well, often we can be at that extreme, speaking the truth, but without love. Jesus didn't do that. But the other extreme is trying to love without being truthful. And of course, here is the political correctness crowd trying to do that as well. A good illustration would be little children, for instance, who do not know how to blend the truth and love. They think that if you love someone, you must shield them from the truth if knowing the truth will hurt them. If it will cause them pain to hear this, well, then a loving person would never say that to them. And of course, we have that movement in our public schools, don't we? We don't criticize anyone. We don't say this answer is wrong. It's okay for your trying. Even if you come up with 4 + 4 = 9, well, good job for answering. That, of course, is not truthful. We do need to be speaking the truth. It is a mark of maturity when we're able to share the truth with our fellow Christians and do it in love. We don't want to be at either of these extremes, do we? Proverbs 27:6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." There you have it, summed up in this statement. Faithful, trustworthy, you can count on this friend, even though he causes some pain, in telling you what the truth really is, in telling you something about yourself, in encouraging you to grow, in encouraging you to improve. But the kisses of an enemy, the politically correct, love at all costs, are deceitful. They are a lie. They are not truthful. You cannot trust this person. So, Proverbs 27:6 goes along with what our verse today, Ephesians 4:15. Truth without love is brutality. Warren Wiersbe said. Truth without love is brutality, but love without truth is hypocrisy. Both of those extremes are wrong. So, we are called upon in this verse, we are to speak the truth in love so that others will be built up. Now, that's interesting. We sometimes pull this verse out of its context and just focus on me as a speaker. Okay, my job is to speak the truth in love. And I say, well, in my heart of hearts, I don't hate this person. I really do want them to hear this. I want them to be better. And so, yeah, I'm doing it in love. But this is in the middle of one long sentence, as I said. This is in the middle of a context of doing everything possible and equipping ourselves to be building one another up. The only reason to speak something in love is to build that person up, to edify them. The result of speaking the truth in love is that believers may grow up into Christ with reference in all things. Jesus Christ is the source of a believer's growth and also the aim and goal of his growth. We'll see that as we continue on this passage next Sunday. The body derives from the head its whole capacity for growth and activity. We'll see that. This passage is in context of edifying other believers. Therefore, I believe it's necessary for the listener, not me, the speaker, I think it's necessary for my listener to sense that the truth I'm about to share is shared in love. Not just the speaker's assessment, not just my saying, well, no, I don't hate that person, I really love them. So no matter how they took it, no matter if they got offended, no matter if they walked away discouraged or broken or defeated or withdrawing or whatever, I did it in love, I did it correctly. No, this is in the context of them being built up. So the important goal is that they feel the love, that they feel built up, that they feel encouraged, not defeated. That's the goal of this passage. It's easy for me as a speaker to defend myself and make a very general emotional claim that, oh, I really want that person's well-being. But we must be very sensitive to how the other person will feel if I proceed to say this statement. Now, what that means is I need to think before I talk, right? And I need to ask the question, does this meet the qualification given in Ephesians 4:15? Does this meet the qualification that when this person is going to hear this, it's going to be done in such a way and in a context that they are going to feel the love. They're going to feel this, I'm doing this for their good. If they don't feel that, I have not obeyed the command. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's easy for me as a speaker to say, well, they just don't get it. That's their fault. No, it's my fault if I didn't communicate the love. That's what this passage says in context. Some have told me that everyone in our churches today is just too sensitive to be able to accept any constructive criticism. It's just too dangerous today to go to anyone and try to help them improve. Everybody's just too sensitive. They're just going to overreact and go off hurt. Well, that's an indictment, is it not? That we have not been obeying this. Habitually, we've not been speaking the truth in love, and so people don't take it that way at all. That's an indictment on the church. This is a key area that we need to concentrate on. So, this passage tells us that my listener must feel and understand the love when I speak the truth to them. Well, we understand what this passage says. Speaking the truth, we've talked about what that is. In love, agape love, we've talked about that many other times, what that is, and how those two to go together. We see the example in Jesus Christ's life, the perfect balance. It's not that we don't understand what this is. It's not that we've never experienced it. I think every one of you could answer my questions up front at the beginning of this message and say, well, yeah, I can think back to someone who did share something that, was a little, I could have taken offense at it or I could have felt bad. But the way they did it and the relationship we have, and I felt their love for me and I went away encouraged that they were willing to be honest and tell me. All of us have experienced that, so we understand what this is about. But the key question is, how do we do it? Right? There are some Bible passages you study and you say, wow, what does this mean? Well, and there's some Bible passages that say, okay, I understand what this means, but is this really true? Do I really believe this enough to live my life on it? Then there's some passages we understand and we believe the value of it, and we say, boy, the challenge here is doing it. And this is one of them, right? We understand what it is, but how do we do it? Let's talk about that. So, the challenge here is not understanding what this command means, but it's carrying it out. Every one of us has experienced firsthand a statement of truth which was not shared in love. We've experienced when it's done correctly and when it's not done correctly. Often the speaker just had to say what he thought because it made him feel better, or it made him feel vindicated that he was right. There's some sort of a battle going on here. Pride is involved. Sometimes the speaker may have spoken for the benefit of others rather than for our benefit. People sometimes say very hurtful things to one person in order to impress others. Now, of course, the classic example may be the playground at school. Young people say some very strong, hurtful things about a certain individual to impress other people, their clique, right? And sometimes you and I, Jesus could have done that in the case of the adulterous woman, right? He could have said, well, this is one woman, she's wrong. Look at all these Pharisees and religious leaders and all the people listening, and maybe I better please all of them. No, he focused on that one lady whose sin he was confronting. He didn't care whether he offended all of these leaders. So sometimes we are tempted to say something that's hurtful to one person, really for the benefit of others, to impress them. Many times the speaker has come to believe that harsh correction is his role in life. Every time we teach marriage class, just like this last time in Zambia, we of course talk about the husband's role and the wife's role, and husband's role to love as Jesus Christ loved unconditionally, the wife's role to submit, to respect the husband, and so on. And always comes up the question at the end of the discussion, well, how far can I as a husband go to make sure my wife is submitting to me? And of course, culturally, that question gets answered differently. And what they're really asking there is, how much pressure can I put on her? In their culture, you can beat your wife to make sure she submits. Well, that's not quite right. So they're asking the question. Well, I come back with, you know what, husbands? The Bible never ever gives us the role as a husband. It's not my responsibility whether my wife submits. That's between her and God. That's a command given to her in Ephesians and Colossians and other books. My role is to love unconditionally and to lead. It's her role to follow, to submit. And of course, then you start an argument, right? And these men, of course, especially say, yeah, but wait a minute. God disciplines us. Yeah, that's held up in the Bible as God a father relating to us a child. Yes, there's discipline involved there. But as far as I know in the Bible, in the symbolism of Jesus Christ being the bridegroom, someday the husband, and the church being betrothed as the bride to Jesus Christ, it never talks about Jesus. Yes, it talks about Jesus' unconditional love and sacrificial love for the church and his leadership. He's the head and so on. Never talks about Jesus disciplining his bride. Just isn't there in that imagery. And break time came and they all went out and talked about it, and they came back and said, okay, yeah, I can see that. You're right. We don't find that imagery. So we assume a role that is not ours. And sometimes in speaking the truth, we want to assume a role as the corrector, the person who's going to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and correct everybody. Well, the Bible doesn't give us that role. The Bible, in fact, has warnings about being judgmental, about judging somebody's character and motives and all of that. And we have to be very, very, very careful that we ask a lot of questions and understand what that person is, why they maybe did what they did, that we don't really know before we accuse them and try to confront them with what we think is the truth. So, we need to learn how to speak the truth in love on a more consistent basis. Some of us need to become more truthful, realizing it's not truly loving at all to lie. Some of us need to become more sensitive, depending on which extreme of this pendulum we are. Some of us need to become much more sensitive to whether our listener will feel our love for them as we tell them the truth. Now, my personality, I grew up in a family, and I tend to, want to be truthful. I want to be right. And not only was my personality, I grew up in a family like that, and I went to seminary where you're trained to study and interpret and make sure all this is right. And so all of that, I need help in becoming more sensitive. Well, guess what? God knew all about that long time ago. And so he gave me a wife who helps me be more sensitive, more loving. There are many, many times that she will say to me, okay, what you said was truthful, but, I don't think that person sensed your love in it. I don't think it was encouraging. I think it could have been hurtful to them. And she's helping me to be more sensitive. Illustration happened this morning here in this church that I think illustrates how sensitive she is. I've already talked to Dick about this, so not surprised to him. In adult Bible class this morning, my wife leans over to me and says, I'm concerned about Dick. He sounds like he's struggling to read. And I lean back to her. Fortunately, Dick had shared this with me earlier. I said, that's because he lost his glasses this morning. And he's trying to read his passage out of the Bible and struggling to read. I don't know how he did it, actually. I don't think I could. I better know it by memory if I lost my glasses. So that's an illustration of how sensitive she is to pick up everybody and what they're feeling and struggling. And God can use that. And yet, there are many, many times when she is balanced enough to confront people. And we went last week to visit a family in dire situation. Very, very poor family, and lots of things there you could correct. But, she was able to, as that teenage girl came in the door crying, and the young boys, she could just hug them and say, I'm meeting you for the first time, but God loves you, I love you, give them the gospel. All of that in a situation that none of us would be comfortable in, I can guarantee you that. So that is the goal, to be balanced, to be sensitive enough to say, yes, I want to share the truth that this person needs, but I am very concerned that they feel the love and they feel encouraged by it. That is the goal. Now, I think we can see that deeper relationships will help us fulfill this command. Deeper relationships will help my listener to understand that I really, really love them. This is a little harder to do to a stranger, the person I meet for the first time. And so this is another reason that I need to be building deeper relationships with other believers. We kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday morning, the men who came to men's fellowship. And one of them said, in this case, we need a bank account where we're building up love, putting money into it in this relationship with this person, so that when the time comes that we need to confront them or need to speak truth into their life, we can use some of that love, we can spend some of that money in order for them to understand that we really, really love them. We're doing this for their good. I think that's very, very, very accurate. We should be building deeper relationships. For instance, there needs to be a trust factor built up. A parent takes a child for a vaccination, and that child looks at that nurse or doctor coming with that needle and looks at mom or dad saying, why are you allowing this pain to hurt me? But they do trust mom and dad that this must be good for me in some way, right? You understand? And so they'll go through with it. Oh, they have fear, and there might be tears and so on, but But they're trusting mom and dad who are there with them in the room, in this case holding them. And okay, if this pain is going to somehow be good enough for me to put up with the pain, I'm going to trust you, mom and dad. I don't know the doctor. I don't know the nurse. I wouldn't trust them. But if mom or dad are there and say, this is necessary so you won't get sick, or this is necessary to fight an infection, or whatever the case is, they are going to, on the basis of the trust of that relationship with their parents, they're going to accept this pain. You understand what I'm saying? That's the kind of relationship that you and I need to have. Another man yesterday reminded us that when we went through Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness." There's that love. "Considering yourselves, lest you also be tempted." The word restore is used medically, or was used medically, for a doctor resetting a bone. Now, depending on how broken or out of place that bone is, that could be a painful exercise. I had an uncle who, in his younger years, actually dislocated his knee to the point where the bone was not meeting in the knee, it was up beside the other bone. So now they're, instead of end to end, they're beside each other. And of course, time went by because you didn't have hospitals and doctors are regularly right on call, emergency and all that. And so his muscles with pain and all just tensed up. And they actually, he tells the story, how they actually had to tie his body to one wall and his leg to the other wall and pull apart with a wire stretcher to get those bones back in line. Very, very painful, but necessary, right? He didn't want to go through life never walking again. And so, restoring, to reset a bone can be painful. Surgery and recuperating from surgery is painful. However, we submit to it, trusting that this is for our benefit. And that is what we're talking about, truth in love. If we are not in the habit of speaking the truth in love with our own immediate family members, then we'll probably not know how to accomplish this with someone else. Think with me. This is where we practice. You say, okay, how am I going to learn this, Lonnie? I don't make a practice. Maybe you do if you're on the extreme of having to tell the truth to everybody. But most of us probably, you say, I don't know how good I am at this because I don't do it, very often. You know what? We do it at home. We do it with family members. And so that's where we need to start and learn how to do this. Husbands, the only way we can regularly speak the truth in love to our wives is if my wife knows beyond the shadow of any doubt that I love her unconditionally and only want to build her up, never to tear her down. Now, if that's my habitual relationship, now I've got a platform, I've got money in the bank, I've got the ability to speak truth into her life without, and her understanding that love. Unfortunately, we as husbands are often tempted to bring our wife down a few notches so that we feel better about ourselves. In other words, we don't care if we're cutting her down. We intend that sometimes. We intend for what we say to hurt. Even the little barbs, that we use. Unfortunately, that's a habit pattern that many of us have. And so now, we don't have the kind of loving, unconditional, sacrificial relationship where I'm always building her up on which to build. We need to change that. Need to change that habit. Now, wives as well. Wives, the only way you can regularly speak the truth in love to your husband is if he knows that your love and respect for him is unconditional. And you only want to build him up and help him and never tear him down. But unfortunately, sometimes wives become so frustrated with their husband and are in such a battle for control with him that they do want to demote him. They do want to win the battle with him. Parents with children. The only way we can regularly speak the truth in love to our children is if they know beyond the doubt, any doubt, that you love them unconditionally, you are sacrificial in everything you do, and you do it only for their good. Even discipline. Got to discipline in love. Unfortunately, by the way, discipline is a part of discipleship. Okay, that's linked together. So discipline is just one small part. Some say 10%. 90% ought to be positive discipleship and encouragement. But unfortunately, many children experience the anger, the frustration, the wrath of their parents who are emotionally out of control as they discipline their child. It is very tempting for us as parents to punish in order to make ourselves feel better than to use consequences to positively teach our child in that situation where they need to be corrected. That's one of the reasons Sharon and I value the book that was written by Cloud and Townsend called Boundaries with Kids. I'd recommend that. It uses consequences, a good Christian book, but it teaches us to use consequences rather than emotional scolding and punishment. And so rather than scolding and berating a child for something they disobeyed or did wrong, it sets up consequences earlier and says, you need to get this done, your homework or whatever it is, you need to have that done in order for you to go to the birthday party of your friend this afternoon. And when the time comes and the homework is not done, the parent doesn't get all bent out of shape and angry and frustrated and say you never and you always and all of these things that are hurtful. You simply say, son or daughter, I am so sorry that you made the choice not to get this homework done and you were playing around doing other things. I'm so sorry you cannot go to this birthday party now. It happens only once a year, but that's our deal. You're not going. I'm sorry you made that choice. We'll see you when we get back. You see the difference? Every child needs to learn, every teenager needs to learn, every adult needs to learn. We have choices. We're independent. We can make our choice. But we can never choose to deny the consequences. And the parent who is not consistent in that teaches their child, of course, that they can get away with it. No, we need to train everybody, no matter what age. There are consequences to every choice you make, Galatians 6. You'll reap what you sow. But we can do it in a non-frustrated, angry way. We can do it in love. We can say, I'm sorry, daughter. We're going to the mall, and you can't go with us because you didn't get this done. That was the deal we made. I'm so sorry. You see the difference? Wow. Speaking the truth in love can work even with parents and children. There are two kinds of respect. There's the kind of respect that's given to an office of an authority. So yes, there's respect by children, should be, to respect their mom and dad. They're the authority God has placed over them. Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. We have a respect for the office of the President of the United States. But there's a second kind of respect that can only be earned. Yes, we have some respect for a man in a certain office, but we may or may not have respect for him as a person and how he operates in that office. Parents, husbands, wives, we need not only to demand respect for our office, our role, we need to earn respect in how we biblically obey God's instructions for that role. You see, in order to obey this command and speak the truth in love, fellowship with others is very important. I need to be fellowshipping with other believers in order to get to the point of building deeper relationships so I can carry out this command. If I'm isolated, if I only show up at church for Sunday morning and I don't really, just say hi, greeting, don't really talk to anybody, if I'm not building deeper relationships with people, then I'm going to have a much harder time obeying this command and building one another up. That's part of the reason, we'll talk more about fellowship in the future, but fellowship is very important among believers. Part of it is we need to build those deep relationships so that we can encourage and build one another up. Without them, that's going to be very, very difficult. And then finally, my actions have to match my words. My actions must prove my love to this person, or my words will never convey love. My listener will benefit greatly from knowing that I love him before I share the truth with him. And that's, of course, based on history, based on action, based on this relationship I'm building. Before I speak, I should learn always to ask, will my listener understand how much I love him from what I am about to say? Your words mean nothing to me, says this listener, because your actions speak the truth about your real feelings for me, right? Our actions need to agree with our words. Now, we have seen this morning that in order to build one another up, we must learn to speak the truth in love. That's a major part of this passage of edification. Speaking the truth in love requires the delicate balance that Jesus modeled for us. Perfect model of grace and truth. How can we make it our habit to speak the truth in love? We need to start learning and developing that habit in the close relationships we have in our immediate family. If we can't do it there, we probably aren't going to do it very well outside of that immediate family. And we have lots of practice to learn that there in that relationship, and we're all still working on that. I end with these questions. How many people have a deep enough relationship with you that you could speak the truth in love to them and they would feel your love? How many relationships do you have in this local body, in this local church, that are deep enough relationships that you could go to some person and try to encourage them and say, you know, I observed something in your life. This would be a lot better if you would change and, you know, react a little different way. This is what comes across when you say this or do this or whatever. How many relationships do you have in this local body that you could do that? What old habits do we need to break in order to obey this command? Hopefully we've seen some of them this morning. What new habits do you need to develop in order to obey this command? Every word coming out of our mouth ought to be a blessing. Every word. That's what this context says, right? Every word ought to edify, ought to build up, ought to not defeat, not discourage, not cut someone to the core. Every word ought to edify, ought to build up. It ought to be with love. Well, Justin's going to come and lead us in the closing hymn. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Okay. Make me a blessing. I hope as you sing these words, you can mean those words and say, all right, I want to obey this command. I want to learn to speak the truth in love in all of my relationships and have God use me to build people up.